And thanks for recording. Okay. So our agenda today, some opening remarks. We're going to tell you a little bit about our Kent State University JED Campus case study. And then we'll do some overview of focus areas. We're not going to break out in rooms because we're such a small group today. So we'll just you know, have some nice discussion together, and we have some really good prompt questions. Well, we hope they're good. And we hope that, you join us in just conversing about what's ahead in terms of our statewide strategy. And welcome. And Stephanie, I will kick it over to you.
Thank you, Erica. So I'm going to be providing a quick overview of JED's approach to strategic planning. Like we've discussed before, JED spotlights 7 strategic areas known as the comprehensive approach, which addresses key areas essential to supporting mental health, reducing substance misuse, and preventing suicide. So JED also emphasizes actionable tactics as seen in number 2, with each area including specific activities and initiatives colleges can implement to enhance student well-being. Lastly, JED emphasizes tailored planning. JED believes engagement is guided through the lens of strategic planning, considering each campus's unique structures, needs, and resources to prioritize impactful actions. Next slide, please. Now I will provide a timeline and signal where we are in this process. So where are we in this strategic planning process? And for the previous community of practice, we really honed in on editing and adding to the strategic plan, the statewide strategic plan, which is the first step in this timeline. We revisited the strategic plan and focus areas, and we ensured they were specific and measurable. We also made sure everyone involved understands the purpose and the end goals. And we also prioritize actions and goals that are more pressing in our campuses. And now we are in the last 2 sections that we see to the right, where we are turning action into implementation. So we will soon be breaking down goals into specific actions and creating tasks that are clear, achievable, and measurable. And in the future, seen to the last one, we will also be providing guidance on assigning roles and creating a timeline that will clearly define who will be responsible for each task and holding each person accountable. Next slide, please. Now, we really wanted to provide a case study of another school system that's sort of similar to Kentucky, that also tackled a system-wide strategic plan. So Kent State University began the 4-year JED Campus program in 2015. Their goal was to enhance and strategically coordinate mental health programs across 8 regional campuses. So not really statewide, but still a large regional campus. The collaboration began with a comprehensive assessment of existing services, which underscored the need to prioritize mental health as a university-wide responsibility. Next slide, please. And so now let's go over what they achieved with this partnership. And backed by their senior leadership, KSU integrated mental health into its strategic planning, creating individualized plans for each campus. And with this support, KSU was able to establish a campus mental health coalition to centralize mental health efforts, sort of what we're doing here today. And as well as adding counseling services to all regional campuses, which reduced wait times as a result of increased psychiatric staffing. Next slide, please. And furthermore, KSU was able to launch a university-wide initiative named the Kent State of Wellness, KSOW, to promote holistic health. And this initiative really focused on creating a culture of health and wellness that targeted mental health, substance misuse, nutrition, physical activity, preventative care, and safety, sort of like the focus areas we're gonna go further into today. And KSU also launched campaigns like Step Up and Speak Out for suicide prevention, maybe something we can look into, a system-wide campaign, and mental health first aid trained 730 individuals. And furthermore, KSU conducted environmental scans to reduce access to lethal means, partnering with local police and facility management. And lastly, KSU enhanced outreach for underrepresented groups and hosted summits and mental health events. And then in December 2019, KSU became a JED Campus alum. And now I'll pass it to Erica for going deeper into our focus areas.
Thanks, Stephanie. And I think it's also important to note, we celebrate sort of like this momentum and energy when it comes to campus wide, multiple campuses and system wide. So we have a really nice, and Stephanie can share with you our Kent State case study that Jed has created, and it's something that we can model for the Kentucky State system as well. So just kind of thinking about, how do we move from just the conversation and the community here to actually making this fairly well known as it relates to your priorities. Okay, so we're going to talk about some focus areas, as we've covered and from the convening in May and some of our community practice we've done this fall, our focus areas for the statewide strategy are campus coordination and communication, student voice and engagement, faculty and, sort of training, and resources and crisis management. So we're really going to be just focused on the bold areas for today. For future community practices, we really hope to look at the gray areas, as there will take a little bit more scaffolding and just continued conversation. So the first thing we like to really think about for all campuses that work with JED is building a culture of care and concern. So when we think about the statewide strategy plan, it's really going to be a roadmap for creating a culture of care statewide and on campus and through all the campuses involved in this. So, and it's really important to acknowledge that progress will take time. This doesn't happen in a few days. It takes a lot of resources, buy-in, administration support, right? And to identify key people who are really going to move the work forward. Um, and so some of the examples of action steps we think of when we are thinking about how to create culture of care, it requires people to really understand why we're focused on mental health, right? To educate on mental health, to educate on suicide prevention, and why we need to save lives of students and staff and faculty. So recognizing that mental health is everyone's responsibility is really one of the core um, areas of JED, that it doesn't just happen in health and well-being centers on campus. Everyone plays a role, whether it's in the classroom, at an event, doing anything sort of on through a campus student's journey. The other thing is, doing an audit. A lot of schools do a lot of great things, and also there are 5 JED campuses in Kentucky that have already started the JED work. So how do we think about what exists and where do we not have to duplicate and kind of centralize where we can? Having a systemic approach to crisis response is also really key. We often hear, I come across a student in crisis and I sort of know what to do, but where can I find where it's centralized and in the middle and where I can do a warm handoff, and or who can I call? So just making sure that everybody's aware and can access the resources is kind of one of our key areas to focus on. And then also reducing mental health stigma on and off campus. So, when we think of culture of care, and this is where we wanted to kind of ask this group, um, how does this sound? What are we missing? And what are the measurable goals for our topic? What are the urgent concerns? If you look to the left side, what resources are available? Who would own this work? And what would make you feel empowered to start? So I just wanted to just leave this here and see if anyone has just sort of anything to kind of respond to in terms of these core questions that we're going to ask ourselves throughout the next, 40 or so minutes. Just what do we need to know when it comes to creating this culture of care across the state? Yeah. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, can folks hear me okay? Okay, great. Um, I would just start by saying self-awareness from folks of all different positions, backgrounds. A lot of times, students, I think faculty and staff members feel stuck in how complicated our systems can be. And so recognizing that the challenges everybody faces are different, also the ways in which people are impacted by broken links or not knowing where to go to seek support is also different, right? Because of their background or because of their social location. Being mindful, I think, of things like power dynamics, right? When we talk about creating safe spaces for people to come forward and share their concerns or come forward to be proactive about seeking mental health support, I think normalizing the culture of care also means we have to decrease stigma and be strengths-based and put the student at the center of what they're hoping to achieve. Through higher ed, yes, but also through accessing wellness resources. I think a lot of these values hopefully are shared with our campus colleagues as well, right? Student and person-centered, trauma-informed. Sometimes people lean on that lens as well, or that practice, being strengths-based. Yeah, so that's, to me, that's what culture of care means.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. I do want to ask you just one question. You started off by saying systems are very complicated, and I hear that all the time from schools. I'm wondering if you could elaborate, or if any of your colleagues would agree with you, or see that it's sort of at their campuses as well. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, and just to elaborate a little bit, people might also use the term complex. So I'm not trying to get too technical in terms of like relationship with cause and effect, but I know there's also kind of theory and ways to speak about what we mean when we say challenging or confusing. I think at the end of the day, campuses are often big places with a lot of different people, many departments that have specific mandates and objectives, right? Like student financial assistance or student counseling, student accessibility. There are many different mandates and objectives, but also lots of overlap in terms of where you can go to for support. So it feels like it's hard to fully understand and grapple with what services are being offered, by whom, and where to go to first, right? How we're triaging students. If we are trying to look at pooling our resources together to tackle some more systemic change, who needs to be part of that conversation? I think we know that students are often also very busy, and when it comes to how we're reaching them through our communications, whether that's email, social media, or old school snail mail, there's also a challenge in asking ourselves what the right way is to engage with those folks, right? Yeah, and I'll leave it at that. I see Ashley has her hand up.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I'll just kind of like follow up like with what Stephanie said. And I can only speak for my experience at U of L on like the health sciences, speaking more so to the access piece. When a student, creating that culture of care and needing a services, thinking about the healthcare insurance, and if a student goes with what is provided by their institution, knowing that that only covers, XYZ providers, and those providers usually have a wait list of, 3 to 6 months. And by then we're right in full on crisis mode with whatever that student needed. So just the system being complex in that way and not having the access and keeping up with the demand, from what I've seen. And I knew from my time at health sciences, especially during the pandemic, there was one counselor, and one counselor cannot serve, 4 health science schools. And even if you hire 20 counselors tomorrow, the processes and navigating the system. So even from the student perspective, those healthcare providers still have patients, right, that they are seeing. So it's just, and even then the resources that are provided to students, like, oh, we'll give you 3 services. And it's like, well, I need more than 3 appointments. Like, so how do we continue, to create it to be sustainable? So I do think, considering the healthcare side of piece, it's not user friendly at all. And I think there are a lot of lessons that we could take away and learn from that and make the system less complex and more about, from my point of view, being patient centered and focused to help us, towards that end goal of being a culture of care truly. So my experience.
Thank you for sharing. Totally agree. Others want to comment on Ashley and Stephanie's remarks? Okay, we're gonna keep going. All right, Stephanie.
Yeah, so like Erica mentioned, a resource audit, and we got into this conversation already about resources and making sure that they're sustainable for our students. One place we can start is with resource mapping. And so this resource comes to us from Harvard University's Making Caring Common project. And it really outlines specifically the steps that it takes to audit resources. And what I found so interesting about this as well is that it provides the time it takes. And so I know that we're so busy in our days, and so we really need to plan out what we're going to do. And so it gives like an hour, this is going to take 30 minutes. And it also provides a mapping template that is really helpful to organize already existing programs that are already targeting what we're talking about. Into those categories. And so I think it'd be a great place to start. It's here for us, and maybe this is something we can look into. And I'll also put the link in the chat if anyone wants to look into that further. We want to go to the next slide.
Yep, great. Okay. And Stephanie, you had already started this, right? Where do people get their information, specifically students? So this is a core part of JED. It's not because universities are massive and everyone's doing their daily jobs. It's like, how do we pause to understand these like different platforms and what we're doing? So to understand communication sources, I do want to ask the group, like, where are students getting information? I think that would be a really good start. How do we use trending apps and platforms to share content? Boosting visibility, hosting tabling events, collaborating with student groups, which a lot of schools are already doing, but how do we amplify that message? Again, how do you connect it back to this culture of care model, whatever it is the state system decides? How do we all like think about that in terms of the message? Centralizing resources, having a one-stop shop, and thematic campaigns. We talked a little bit last COPs, like what would it take to have a theme-based calendar so that everyone can refer to the same thing, but like also there were some mixed messages, like I don't know if that would work, or I have a better way to do it. So kind of aligning there. So anyone want to comment on just sort of like where students, to your knowledge, are getting information? Any ideas you have that you would put on paper today in terms of like what needs to be happening? We'd love to hear it.
I can say, again, speaking, for the institution that I was at, it was very heavily like publicized around like Welcome Week, orientation. And then in our Gen 101 classes, you have different resources come in and talk about the services that are provided to students. And I personally feel like after, a student's first year, it kind of goes to the wayside. You might see them at a tabling event or a week themed, promoting their resources. And then it just kind of falls off. To Stephanie's point earlier, I think an idea that I would put on paper to help with the destigmatized of needing support services is, I think it should be you know, in a perfect world, that a student has, right, like 3 mandatory check-ins to where we build up where this is not just you come where you have a problem or you're in crisis. So changing the culture of like, you know, at very minimum, at these 3 critical points, right, all resources on deck that you come and you talk for 30 minutes, right? And you can talk about anything. And I think if you build up that reputation of like, you just literally go talk, and if after 3 appointments, like all is well, then you don't ever have to like come back or, you know, engage in this resource in that way. But I think to build up the idea that it's okay to utilize resources. So only then do I feel like people will be like, oh yeah, I went there and had a great time and got this out of the session. I was really able to get that off my chest or whatever it is. I think we have to build it up first. So that's what I would like to see, like almost like a you have to opt out program, like you're already opted in. And we want you to meet this minimum times, whatever institutions have the capacity for it. But I think I would like to see that moving forward.
That's a great idea. And I heard the word mandate. That sometimes really works when schools in a state, certainly the ones we're working with, they mandate this across institutions, and then there's like true buy-in. That's an awesome idea. And the Gen 101 class is also a great way to extend resources. So thanks for those suggestions.
And I'll just kind of like add one more thing. Like on the grand scheme of thing, working at like the dental school at the time, I did not know that the actual profession of a dentist has like the highest, you know, suicide ideation rate, you know, of that profession. And I just think about, you know, the students who are dedicating 4+ years to this life. At no point in their curriculum do they have these coping skills addressed. So if we know that this is the highest of those professions, like what are we doing on the front end? So I think, you know, to what I said earlier, if we incorporated, you know, that we sit down with students and engage with them in this way, could we see that number decrease, you know, for our school? So, you know, that's why I was like, you know, opting into such a critical time to help with more of the preventative side than our knee-jerk, you know, reaction at the end. So, yeah.
I'm curious, who on campus would lead these mandatory check-ins? What department would it live in, and would it vary by campus? And how do you think about that?
Um, I don't know. In a perfect world, because health sciences is health sciences, like we have a whole hospital system. You know, I would engage in, you know, utilizing that system, but there are also dedicated staff, you know, within the medical school, within health sciences. And I think if students didn't want it to be that close to home, I'm sure, you know, within the Office of Student Affairs, we could contract third party, you know, to where there's separation, you know. But, you know, I don't know all the players at B, but I would assume, like with the health sciences focus, that there's a whole system that we could tap into. I do know for like the main campus, there is a, you know, counseling center, but, you know, I don't know how many students are enrolled on a good day, you know, but kind of keeping it separate in that way so that those who are on health sciences and the main campus could focus on those two, you know, populations. And going back to the health sciences, it's a very, I don't want to say special student, but, you know, their challenges might be a little different than, you know, undergrad. So getting somebody with the focus that could help either student and either population. So I don't know. I'm rambling, but I hope that it makes sense.
Great ideas. No, this is something we could consider as a recommendation under, check-ins, or the idea of making sure students have resources. So all ideas are really welcome. Oh yeah, Stephanie, I love this. You want to share more? about that, those check-ins during COVID?
I'll opt actually to just leave it in the chat. I
Okay.
am mindful. I think we've heard a lot from folks at CPE, so definitely don't want to put others on the spot. But if folks who are outside of CPE also would like to contribute their perspective, feel free to do so. But yes, that was just a Canadian perspective from my prior life. Thank you, though.
Great idea. Thank you. It's good model to potentially follow. Thank you. Others? Others want us to respond to how students are getting information or some ideas you want us to jot down?
Yeah, this is D Parker. I'll jump in. Students respond better to other students. So having a student lead these mental health workshops are very beneficial. That was my approach when I was the coordinator of cultural diversity at HCTC. I got some students of mine. I say my students like I'm a teacher, but still, I got some students of mine to reach out to various groups. We was into high schools, talking with high school kids that was getting ready to transition over to a 2-year university and beyond. But students respond better to other students and people they can relate to. That was something that really helped when I was at HCTC with getting that student input and getting that buy-in. And with my leadership program, the Inner Circle, we had our weekly meetings to where we talked. It was unfiltered, of course. Barbershop talk is what we call it. Working with some brown and black males throughout the community that I live in, but having an open dialogue boosted their confidence and helped them kind of combat with some mental health issues they were facing because we all go through similar things. So having these discussions and relatable stories was very beneficial. And I'm proud to say 2 of my students have since graduated from high school. One of them is at Union College. He's the president of the BSU at Union College. The other one is playing ball in Tennessee. And then one of my high school kids who's getting ready to step into college scored second highest in the state for engineering. So
Oh,
I was really, really proud of all 3 of them.
congrats to them. Thanks for sharing those ideas. And you're absolutely right. I mean, when students are creating these events and tabling opportunities, giving schools their web team content to share, creating the videos, it goes a long way. And I love the barbershop shop talks. Like that's such a great idea and something that like again could be a recommendation for even for some schools to pilot or look to you as a sort of or supportive, helper or advisor if they were to try that. So I appreciate all these ideas. Thank you.
Yeah, I would be more than happy to talk with anyone about it. Because growing up, the barbershop is where we talk and cut up at, as well as like my sisters and them going to the beauty school, getting their hair and stuff done. That was their outlet to kind of just be them. I don't know what they talked about. Ain't none of my business, but it was really beneficial.
Yeah. Also consistent with Jed's messaging that actually not everybody needs therapy. They just need that spot to like connect, right? And in the barbershop, church, your community center, it may be that place. So really appreciate that point of view. Other ideas.
Hi, I'll go. I'm Carrie.
Hi, Carrie.
So I just want to bring the online student perspective to this as well. So I know, again, my role, as I put in the chat, I'm newer in this role for specific to online students, but have been in student success for years. And what I found just in this role is really just remembering to think about online students are typically adult learners, and they're going to be a little bit older. And like here at U of L, like right now, like I think our average age for our online learners are 32 versus 21 for our on-campus students. So just looking at, the resources, the conversations they're having, what we know also about online learners is that they don't see themselves as a student first. They see themselves as an employee first. Most of them are working, they have other family responsibilities. And that's not necessarily very different from on-campus students too, because there's more and more of our students now, traditional age students that have competing priorities. But I would also just think to think about, as we look at initiatives or programs, that what are the things that we can do to support the online learners that aren't on campus and that aren't even in our state. So making sure that you know, there is a community that they can tap into. So I know one of our things, we're actually building a new team of student success coaches for this particular, you know, not just for mental health, but for everything, you know, just to help them with student success. And that's something to keep in mind, is how do we build a community within themselves so that they can have that, you know, it's one thing to be in a classroom and have discussions face to face, but another to have the online discussion board and not have that, you know, I don't want to say it's not as easy, right? So there's got to be some intention put forth, a lot of self-motivation for online students to really work it into their schedule. And I would say that, you know, most are choosing it because they like the asynchronous learning, because it is flexible and they can do it on their time. And so whatever is, you know, proposed or set up, you know, just thinking of how does that work with our online students too, that aren't physically on campus and may need after hours, maybe even on weekends, that kind of thing. So so yeah, just kind of keeping that perspective and knowing that there is definitely a need for that community though for online students. And so that, you know, I think that's one of our challenges. How do you build it? You know, you can build something, but are they going to come to it? What are they using? So I applaud just, you know, asking the students what do you want? You know, what will you use? So yeah, so that's my 2 cents.
Definitely a tricky group to reach, and it's very timely. As Jed, we're bulking up our resources for online students. So we hope to look to you, Carrie, on how that may land for your students. And also, it's a group of students we'll include in the statewide strategy on making sure schools are reaching pockets of populations and making sure there's spaces and we're reaching them emotionally and mentally. So I appreciate that perspective a lot. We're going to go on to the next thing. And Stephanie, was wondering if you could share a little bit on this, because you know you found this and you found this to be really useful and something that like maybe higher ed campus professionals don't know about.
Yeah, so something I've been seeing trending a lot more is utilizing social media to reach students. I'm sure that's not new. I mean, platforms like TikTok, YouTube are really where students go for their sources of information. And so I did some digging and I found that there's actually a 2024 higher education social media engagement report. It was so cool. It had so many insights on what types of media students are really gravitating towards. And really, the one that shot to the top was just authentic moments on TikTok. I'm sure we've seen folks just come up with like a tiny microphone asking like interview questions, or just snapshotting like authentic moments on campus. And so I thought of, you know, creating a whole calendar of themes seems like a really big task to undertake. But, you know, creating moments like this on social media, maybe partnering up with marketing could be an interesting thing to do. Or even if you're trying to promote a program that you have on campus, I thought it'd be great to share these insights and yeah, to just garner a better communication and connection with students. And happy to link it in the chat as well.
Yeah. A lot of cool things we could be doing, you know, together. So. Student voice.
Yeah. So going on to what we were talking about, I think Carrie really went into this, you know, really talking to our students and hearing what they need. When Jed is working with schools and just in our programs in general, we're really looking to students for their perspective and their voice, because we are working for them and we want to make sure that their ideas are incorporated as much as possible. And so one thing we thought of was maybe asking students to join future community practices or convenings. We think it'd be a great way to have a student just present to also weigh in on their needs and what they're hoping to look for in the future. And so maybe we can think about what are the steps to get there. We also thought about student advisory boards and student-led committees. Personally, when I was a student, there were a lot of committees talking about, you know, we really want peer mentoring programs and we're going to make sure we bring this to our dean, to our president, to XYZ or any higher up that really has to do with this decision-making process. So maybe we can think further about that. As well as, again, engaging student voices further in social media and also allowing them to share their experiences. So I'm curious, is this something that's present in any current schools? How do you get your sources from students? Do you meet with them one-on-one? Do you hear them?
Well, this is D. Parker again. I'm gonna jump in. First, we have to create the opportunities for students to speak. That has been something that has been lacking recently. Uh, but like I said, when I was at HTTC, I created these opportunities for students to be themselves, to bring their unapologetically voices to the table and have those concerns addressed. That's something that is very helpful. Having a student lead, of course, we talked about that, but creating these opportunities for students to speak and to be comfortable. Um, that's the biggest issue right now.
Yeah, and I think when you were talking about your barbershop talks, I think you're creating that space where it's comfortable for students to speak and not feel judged, and yeah, just allowing that space for them. Thank you. Does anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah, I will. I will say that I think most of us probably use surveys to get, to see what's going on. And we just completely, well, one's going on continually right now is that each year we're surveying our online students to see, what are their, what are their thoughts on not just online teaching, but also that community building and things. So getting responses is definitely a challenge, always has been with surveys, but that's definitely one. And I will say too, I'm glad you brought up like the advisory board and things, that is something that we are looking to build for our online. One of the things I'm coming on board to do is also, bring the campus community together to figure out specifically for online students, but there are some things, I can't speak for all of U of L, of what others may be doing with committee work and student led, but that is something that we are gonna make sure there is a seat at the table for our students, that they are involved in that, and looking at the peer mentoring to have them involved to provide some leadership skills and just that involvement that again, students that on campus might have a little bit easier time to be able to access it. But yeah, so thanks for bringing that up. But yeah, that's something that is on our plan. So hopefully maybe next year I'll be able to report a little bit more to say here's what we're doing. But yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, we have a resource for that. So if we want to go to the next slide. So I know creating advisories, groups, that it's time consuming. Sometimes there isn't funding. So I also did more digging on that, and NAMI, Active Minds, and I'm sure there's more organizations out there that are constantly trying to push for chapters on college campuses. And if there isn't currently a chapter at your current campus, they actually have step-by-step instructions for how to do that. And so I thought this be a great way, if there isn't much bandwidth at a campus, yeah, Active Minds and NAMI really takes over that process. And yeah, I think Carrie, if you want to look into that, I think it'd be awesome. If we want to go to the next slide. Yeah, so now we're going to go over belonging. And as we remember from the Healthy Minds student survey, outside stigma was a big factor in why students weren't reaching out for mental health support. And so I think that's something that we could really focus in on today, and how we can address that, how we ourselves have experienced that as well as students if we went to school in Kentucky, and just finding ways on how we can approach that. And so we really thought about peer connections, and we've already talked about that a lot already. And so creating mentorship programs is usually what we recommend, but also facilitating student-led groups, really allowing students to really take over that space for other students, because like Daryl said, students listen to students, and they will most often turn to them for support. And we also thought of defining belonging at KY. Usually schools have traditions or fun things they do to inaugurate students into the school. I remember Bryn Mawr, they light up candles as oh, welcome, you're now a Bryn Mawr student. And so maybe thinking about how students define that identity for themselves at KY, and recognizing and celebrate students, finding ways to celebrate them and their achievements, and maybe even students that are very vocal about student mental health, finding ways to elevate those voices so that they can go out into the community and also inspire that as well. So I'm wondering, is this something that's currently happening at your campus? Is this something you're hoping to bring to your campus? And yeah, how can we get there?
I don't mind to share like a little bit. So I mean, I'm from Kentucky, went to UK, and I think as far as like traditions go, it's like I feel like something that's often overlooked is like UK basketball and things like that. And I know like I don't want to center like UK in this conversation, but like kind of finding out like what regions like are passionate about. For example, can really like leverage that tradition and kind of like figuring out like, I feel like students have also changed. Like I feel like some students are kind of like going to college and it's not like the typical like, you know, I guess like I don't know, like traditional events, like homecoming, like maybe isn't like a super huge deal at some campuses, but I think like finding out like what times, like what things students are actually like interested in, even if that's like outside of campus. For example, like there's always like events going on in like Louisville and like Lexington, things like that. And even in like rural communities. So like, festivals and things like that, like kind of like promoting mental health off campus too, in places that students do frequent could be helpful and to address those like traditions that maybe aren't set in stone on campuses anymore. So just wanted to kind of share that tidbit because I mean, I think it's kind of like an important thing to know as far as like reaching students and addressing traditions that have changed over time.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I remember in my undergrad we didn't have many of those. I think we only had one when we started off, and then after that it was like, yeah, I go to that school, and yeah, other state schools have this really loud and proud identity, and so yeah, thank you for sharing more on that. Anyone else?
I'll just contribute that we're certainly trying to figure out how to do it. Um, we're not there yet, but in our meetings, we're talking a lot about how to get to the peer connections piece. We did have some folks meet with NAMI the other day and see if there's some opportunities there for us to kind of develop a framework for some sort of mentoring training.
I remember going to a campus once and I said, your mascot is everywhere. And like I was like, it sounds like I was in front of staff and students and I was like, it sounds like you all like this is major here. And none of them related or identified to the mascot. And I was like, well, then there's room. There's room to invest and embed different options for caring about your friends and your peers and your faculty. And it was a really nice conversation that like you all could open up on your own. Like, how do you identify with this on campus? Or do you feel at home on this at this part? So certainly a lot of like topical areas there.
Yeah, and we can think more of like online students, the community isn't so in person, so how do we establish that identity there as well?
Olivia,
Good.
sorry, I just want to ask one question. Olivia, when you were talking about um looking outside of like the traditions we're maybe used to and figuring out what students are interested in, do you have a pulse on like the students, you're at all working with on what they're interested in, just so we can kind of note that, or if anyone else wants to share? Just wondering.
Um, I mean, I'm just thinking outside the box here. I mean, I don't want to like talk about like Lexington too much because that isn't all of Kentucky to keep that in mind. So I like, for me, I'm trying to challenge myself to kind of figure out like what other regions and counties are like really interested in. Like, I feel like I'm not the person probably to like speak on that because I don't want to like be biased and like, you know, make it seem like UK is like the only school that exists in Kentucky because it's not. So just want to be like mindful of that. But as far as like I guess students, I mean, I'm not an undergrad anymore, but I mean, I feel like I don't know, I feel like something that I've kind of thought about is like there isn't like a lot of spaces like outside of like online that students are like I don't know, like I don't say frequenting, but it's just kind of like how do you kind of find students when it's kind of like some of them really like exist just like in like an online environment sometimes like social media. So um that probably didn't answer your question, I'm sorry, but yeah. I don't
No,
honestly, I probably just don't know. So, and I'm okay to say that I don't really know the answer.
no worries. And I appreciate the respect of not just speaking on all of the state. But when we're building a statewide strategy, I think it's important to get everyone's point of view on how it fits with them and their community, but also like think broader and identify when we don't know and asking other places. So I so appreciate that. And that's okay to not know. I don't think many of us know. It's probably changing every second. But curious if others have responses to that.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
What are students interested in?
Yeah, I'm with Olivia. I don't really know. I just get the sense of truly want to make a friend, a connection, um, and learn from their peers. So, however that is facilitated, I think will be appreciated. I have what I would call like a younger sibling, my best friend's brother, who's in college, and he is a COVID kid. You know, his last few years of high school, right? They didn't have those social interactions. So when I was at U of L, you know, he was definitely in my office like every day, and I'm like, you know, this is my job. Like, I'm not your friend. So I think a way to create more, you know, the whole purpose of this authentic interactions for them to engage and not talk through the phones all the time through the social media platforms, would be the lesson that I've learned, you know, from, you know, that student specifically. So, and how we do that, you know, I don't know.
Thanks. Thanks for that story. Yeah, you're right. We have to recognize the students who lost a lot and are still catching up. And belonging is part of probably what students are looking for, but I imagine it's more, and we have to ask. So it's just one pillar of what we're all trying to do together. So thank you.
I just thought of something that maybe, I mean, as far as interest, I feel like something that's maybe like overlooked is like live music, like concerts. Like students love going out and like, going to concerts and like maybe if there's like a way to like find like local musicians, like sponsor like an event that kind of draws out students and like the messaging is kind of like themed around belonging, mental health, creating that community. Like, I mean, it's Kentucky, like we had like Railbird, which is like a huge thing. Like a lot of people go to that over the summer. I mean, there's just so many. I think that's something that's unique to Kentucky and it's like the culture and um the horse industry, like we have Keeneland, the Derby. I mean, I think how do we kind of incorporate those like authentic traditions in Kentucky, and kind of, I know some students are also like out of state too, but I'm just like thinking outside the box of like some students are really proud about being Kentuckian and like engaging in those traditions, like going to Keeneland or going to the Derby is like, a big thing. So as far as interest, like personal interest, I don't know. I would just say sports, a lot of them love sports. But
So good. That's a great idea. You could think about how to bring resources to a concert. You can host a centralized concert. You can look to musicians who care a lot about mental health. I mean, we have a roster, or, just kind of brainstorm what that would look like and do key events around student interest and staff interest as well. That would be really fun. And we could add that to the strategic plan, which is a nice idea.
I'll kind of add to that. When I worked in like the tourism industry, the like pitch at the time was like, be a tourist in your own backyard. So I don't know if it's just the summer thing, but there's this thing called the Cultural Pass, and it's for like little kids, but it allows you to go to different parts of the state, to different well-known places. And I think to that point, to create maybe some hustle and bustle with students to get to engage with other students on other campuses in different parts of the states, make it like, more of a, learning about other students on campuses who might be also going through the same thing. So it's like, not only do you have a connection, right, on your campus, but now you've made a friend in a different part. And I think with the whole thing of when I think of the collaborative and where we work for to align the mission of, resources. And if UK knows that U of L is going to have, all these students on this campus at this time, and I'm always picking on U of L UK. I know there are other institutions in the state, but it creates more of, like we're in this together for the greater good of students, building community, graduating and persisting on, and knowing that other schools do have things to offer you as well. So creating that engagement could be a thing of, you just went there for a scavenger hunt. Now, right, you have this whole big thing that you've made a friend and learned about resources in a way. So tying it together.
Great ideas. Awesome. All right. And Stephanie will share a little bit about something she found, which is awesome.
Yeah, so I'll go over our last resource. I know that our schools are already doing a lot of great things, and sometimes, students aren't so aware about it. I mean, that first year, they're just getting to know everything that's available to them. So I found this great example from University of Michigan that essentially creates these prompts. And so if a student is like, I'm feeling kind of lonely, I'm looking for a friend, and once they click that drop down, you'll see multiple resources that really help them with that. And other creative prompts. And so I'm thinking once, if we do want to go ahead with that resource mapping, this would be a great way to organize that, specifically what students are looking for. And so, yeah. Now
Question.
to some Q&A.
Don't see any, but we had rich discussion and a lot of great ideas. All these ideas are going on that strategic plan. So thank you so much for all the examples and hopefully being a guide for other schools who want to talk more. We are sharing the post survey. We'll share it out with the slides at the end of this. We're like right on time. We made it, everyone. Really appreciative for all those who came today. We'll send the recording out to those who couldn't make it. And thank you so much. Wishing everyone a healthy, happy Thanksgiving holiday and break. Hopefully you all take a break if you can. And thanks for the work you're doing. And we're really looking forward to future communities of practice to continue the work together. So really thank you. Thank you, Stephanie, for co-leading this. And thanks everyone.
Thank you, everyone.